Good afternoon, our friends. It's so good to be with you again. Erin and I are tag teaming today. We actually we have to reschedule. We had another interview scheduled with a doctor who does some alternative pharmaceutical stuff that I find intriguing, but we'll reschedule with him in a week or two. We have Mandy Bloom coming up again, and we have some other really neat interviews coming up. But today we're going to refocus and talk about something that we are asked about probably more than anything else, I'm thinking. What do you think, Erin?
Pretty common questions.
And even if it's not a common question, it should be, because what we're going to talk about today, and we invite your questions, is gut health. Our gut health influences our entire bodily health and even our mental health. This is really important. Most people don't realize that most of the chemicals that are utilized by the brain to function correctly are actually made in the gut. And then when you have things like eczema and autoimmune diseases, all kinds of things, besides just diverticulitis, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, and all of these things that kind of fall under one umbrella, it's all related. And we should, more of us, be asking and looking at our gut health, because our gut health is really the basis of our overall bodily health. And Erin, you were telling me earlier today that you are learning more about this in your classes right now with the Nutritional Therapy Association.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been really interesting. Like one of the things that we talked about is, IBS, which is obviously irritable bowel syndrome, and that kind of has a set of its own symptoms. You've got diarrhea, you've got gas, you've got bloating, that kind of thing, and it can just kind of be like a functional issue. But then IBD, irritable bowel disease, is separate from that, in that it can cause a lot of damage, and it can be more of an autoimmune issue. And that's where things like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, those kind of things fall under that umbrella. And so the two are a little bit, IBS and IBD are a little bit different in the sense that IBS is probably a little bit easier to manage, and IBD can really cause some issues and a lot of damage in your small intestines and your colon, especially. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting to learn about it and talking about therapies and things like that for it.
Good. Yeah. So what we're finding and what you're learning is that more and more of our diseases, more of our negative conditions with our bodily health, are directly related to what's going on in our gut. And the reality is that the pharmaceutical companies and allopathic medicine don't have any real answers, do they?
I mean, their answers tend to be, watch what you eat, stay away from spicy foods, things like that, and then tend to offer prescriptions like Humira, those kind of things, steroids. A lot of steroids are given out. So while those things can help deal with inflammation in the moment, there's no healing happening. It's just covering up symptoms and managing flare-ups. So, that's kind of the consensus on it. The umbrella of irritable bowel disease is that you just kind of manage your flare-ups, and you want those to go fewer and far between. Then it's something that can be cured. So that's the approach, is just to manage flare-ups and try to keep them as far away as possible, and deal with them when they come on. So
yeah. And unfortunately, some of those Band-Aid solutions actually cause further damage. And then we find ourselves further down a road of gut dysbiosis with more and more issues. And unfortunately, I know quite a few people who have these problems. And one is a young girl, I think she's 12 now, daughter of a friend of ours. And she's so severely sick from a damaged gut. And the doctors kept prescribing another steroid or another Humira or another pharmaceutical. I'm thinking a lot lately, not that this is new to me, but I've been really thinking a lot lately about how man tries to be the solution or come up with the solution with chemicals to all of our ailments. But that's actually going against God's design. And those chemical solutions exacerbate the problem or create other problems. And so you end up a really sick puppy. Whereas God provides us answers and there are solutions, and we can turn the train around, but it takes dedication, it takes work. In our family, we have done the GAPS diet a few times. We're going to talk about that. We'll talk about the particulars with that. We have done a few other things. My husband has severe gut damage. He recovered from severe gut damage years ago. And through some choices that he made some years back, he's back in the position where he's got more damage. And he remembers the work it took to be well once. And I think at 61, he's tired. We want to be able to reverse conditions before the person is just worn out to the point that they just can't deal anymore. Now, the first that I ever really started to hear about and learn about gut dysbiosis was when I picked up Jordan Rubin's Patient Heal Thyself. And Erin, you have that. I cannot find my Jordan Rubin books. I don't know where they are.
Yeah, this one. We have it linked in the notes. It's such a great story. He had Crohn's disease, right?
Yeah, he had Crohn's disease. He had been to every doctor. He'd been to doctors in Europe. He'd been to doctors all over the United States, and he just continued to get worse and worse. None of the doctors had any real answers for him. And you can see from that cover shot, the two photos on the left, that's what he looked like. And I'm familiar with somebody looking like that too, and actually worse. But now Jordan is completely healthy, and he figured out how to heal himself, how to help his body to heal himself. He later wrote The Maker's Diet. We will be at some point interviewing Jordan. Thank you. Yep.
Yep.
I don't know where either of those are. I'll probably need to buy new copies. Anyway, Jordan's information is pertinent, relative, important, useful, and some of the best that is out there. I want to show a slide quickly of what a healthy gut versus what gut dysbiosis kind of looks like. I wish I would have found an actual photograph. But if you understand that the lining of our guts, of the intestinal wall, are covered with little tiny villi that are like fingers, and those fingers are covered with constantly replenishing cells that are there. They both protect the villi from infiltration from things that don't belong there. And that's all made up of a film of microbes that they serve a multitude of purposes, including creating more microbiology to help us digest our foods, absorb our foods, cleanse the colon, and things like that. They also produce some of the nutrients that we need from what we put into our guts. So Erin and I were talking about short chain fatty acids, for instance, a little while ago. Those are all produced by the microbiology in the gut. Mm-hmm. And the villi should be both intact, covered with this film of bacteria. It should be alive and well and healthy. But when we do things to ourselves, like put chemicals, including chemical Band-Aids, and pour foods and foods that are laden with toxic chemicals, that film breaks down and the cells don't replenish quickly enough, and you end up with villi that not only are not safely protected, but they start to be eaten away until you get to the point that they're kind of dying. And this allows for matter in the gut, food matter in particular, to infiltrate the gut lining instead of being broken down and absorbed properly by the microbiome. Instead, there are literally holes in the gut wall, and that allows for things to get through. This is gut permeability. This is gut dysbiosis. It allows, for instance, food particles that are not properly broken down to infiltrate the lining of the gut. And it creates a cascade of side effects that only gets worse and worse and worse if you don't actually stop the damage and begin the healing. Pharmaceuticals do not ever heal. They don't heal anything. Pharmaceuticals have some merit. There are certainly times when they're needed, but when it comes to gut dysbiosis in particular, we need to look at what's aggravating the dysbiosis, and then how can we turn the train wreck around and begin to heal. So, Erin, you're learning about the healing aspects now. What are some of the things that you're learning in particular?
Well, obviously food is a big part of that. So being careful about foods that are going to cause irritation and inflammation.
How do we know what foods those are, though?
Well, typically sugars, grains, starches are going to be big no-nos. Alcohol, NSAIDs,
non-steroidal anti-inflammatories.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, but absolutely no grains, no sugar, none of that kind of thing. We talked about how a low FODMAP diet could be helpful for some people for a little while when they're kind of getting started out, just because of the types of fibers. You probably understand a little bit more than I do about what a low FODMAP diet looks like. It stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols.
And basically, those are types of sugars, and I'm just going to lump them together and say sugars that ferment in the gut and create damage. Whereas, and the disaccharides and the monosaccharides and all of those, the disaccharide is just pure sugar in the most easily, quickly converted form. And the reason why these things are important to understand is that anytime you take in something like a high FOD, something that's sugar, starch, anything that produces sugar in the gut, is that we talk about symbiology within the gut and the microbiome. All bacteria that should be present in the gut have a purpose. So it's not that, for instance, E. coli is bad. It's that when you have too much sugar in your gut, then the microbiology, the balance of the microbiology is off. It goes off. And then things like E. coli can proliferate. And other organisms, they no longer are in balance, and things that are good in small amounts and necessary become dangerous in larger amounts. They become dangerous, toxic, inflammatory. And anything that is a sugar, including a starch, a grain, which is starches, that produces sugar in the gut. And so that is going to encourage the overgrowth of microorganisms that should be, way down here. Then the more beneficial, that I hate to say that, the bacteria within our microbiome that need to be more numerous become less. And you get this dysbiosis that causes inflammation and toxicity. And because then the gut wall is permeable, some of these toxins enter through the gut wall. It becomes just a circus of conditions, of problems. Now, I mentioned Patient Heal Thyself. Another book, I'm still getting my books organized in my new office area. This was the first book that I read after Jordan Rubin's book that really helped me to understand what was going on in the gut. Now, this is written by my friend Natasha Campbell-McBride. I'm hoping to have her on. I'll be seeing her probably in just a few weeks. I'm going to ask her about doing an interview. This program was developed by Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride. So she is an MD. And she started to look into how she could help her autistic child heal his gut. Autistic children always have gut issues. It always begins in the gut. And she wanted to help her son with some of his symptoms. And I don't even know that she really fully understood that he could overcome autism, but he did. So she took what then was a popular dietary plan or dietary tweaking, which is specific carbohydrate diet. And she started working with that and tweaking it until she came up with what became gut and psychology syndrome. This book, the term things go viral. Well, it really actually did. So anybody in the natural health world who works with any kind of real serious healing knows about the GAPS diet. We have followed the GAPS diet. My husband did the GAPS diet. I did it with two of our girls when they had, one had Lyme disease and we needed to conquer that. And another had, we had salmonella poisoning and she had gut damage and we worked with that. At any rate, Natasha's son lost his autism diagnoses. But since the yellow book, she later came out with Gut and Physiology Syndrome. This is my go-to book now because this explains conditions far beyond what the original GAPS book was intended to. And it explains, for instance, why rheumatoid arthritis happens, what affects it, how you can overcome it, and it tweaks your diet to overcome that specific thing. Or any number of other things, arthritis, fatigue, fibromyalgia, lupus, all of these things are autoimmune disorders that begin in the gut. Allergies, another thing. So this is literally my favorite book. This is kind of my Bible of healing. And I recommend every household have it and read it and refer to it regularly as I do. This is an important book. So we're gonna recommend that above. These are all my favorite books back here. I don't know if you ever noticed them, but that's right there, one of the top. But I want to go back to causes. So we're accustomed now to eating really poor quality food and food that is laced with a lot of toxins, glyphosate, pesticides, glyphosate is an herbicide, but other herbicides, fungicides, on and on and on. And that's what people are eating every single day in their within their typically high carbohydrate diet, right? So they're eating things regularly that actually cause damage by the input of toxins and the breakdown of the microbiome and the microbiology. And then they're eating sugar, starting their day with dangerous extruded cereal, even if it's organic. It doesn't matter. We'll have a later episode about labels. They're putting things into their body, even sometimes that are supposed to be clean and good, and they're really not, because they've got those FODMAP foods, the fermentable oligosaccharides that just cause or continue the gut dysbiosis and the upset of the microbiome. And so we're doing it over and over and over again. We take medications, it damages the gut. We drink city water treated with chloramide, a chlorine compound, and fluorine, and lots of other things. It causes gut damage. We live a very stressful life. It causes gut damage. It's just on and on and on. So no wonder we're so sick, right? But we really want to focus on how can we get better? And that's why I bring up these books, especially the Gut and Physiology Syndrome Diet. Erin, what are you learning right now about some of the keys to overcome gut dysbiosis?
Well, one of the really big things that helps with the intestinal permeability, or leaky gut, whatever you want to call it, but is taking some things that help to restore the mucosal lining of your digestive tract, including your intestines. So that's going to be herbs like marshmallow root, okra. It's going to be aloe. It's going to be the amino acid L-glutamine. These are all really, really, really healing for your whole digestive tract, but especially your small intestines, and is really going to help those villi that are getting all gunged up. So and for myself, that's a protocol that I did several years ago with my functional medicine doctor, and I will say that that was like one of the most helpful things for me, was to start taking some of those herbals. And there's two. The one that I took was called GI Resolve. And it's fantastic. It has the L-glutamine, it has aloe, it has marshmallow. Let me see if I can pull up. I have it linked in the notes, but it has okra, it has licorice, and it has a little bit of MSM, methyl sulfonyl methane.
Yeah, that's a hard one to say.
Mm-hmm. And then there's another one that's really similar, and these are both powders, and there's something that I took every morning on an empty stomach for about I think I did it for about 2 months. So the GI Resolve is from Biotics Research, and that one doesn't really taste like anything. I just added it to water. And then the other one is from Designs for Health. It's called GI Revive powder. So they pretty much, if you put GI Resolve or GI Revive, they're both going to pop up. But this one is, I think they put like a little bit of peach. I think they call it peach flavoring. But it has a lot of the same things. It has the L-glutamine, it has citrus pectin, it has aloe vera, slippery elm, marshmallow root, okra, a lot of the same things, but it also has quercetin, and some other things that are going to be a little bit more helpful with the inflammation aspect. But both of those are really good powders, and that's something that I did for about 2 months. That's my friend Alan. He's going to play guitar with us at church on Sunday.
I was going to say, that's not Kevin. Who's in your house? He's not free enough to be Kevin.
So those are two powders that are going to be really, really helpful to help restore the health of your gut lining, your whole digestive tract, but especially your intestines. So those are like, and just from personal experience, I can tell you that is one of the most helpful things that I've ever taken and noticed a huge difference. And then obviously probiotics to help with the bacteria, your commensal bacteria. So we've talked a lot about how strains like L. acidophilus, bifidobacteria, any of the lactobacillus, those ones are all really good ones those are all good strains to have. So those are highly recommended when you're dealing with especially IBD, like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis and dysbiosis. But and I know one of the ones that I know you use a lot and I've used pretty often is Dr. Ohhira's.
Right.
That one has a really great mixture of, it has all of those plus more, including the postbiotics that help with the short chain fatty acids, and prebiotics in it. So that one's a really good one to help replace your bacteria in your gut. And Just Thrive is another one that's really good. So those are the two that I kind of go back and forth on as far as probiotics go.
And when we're talking probiotics, purchased, bottled capsules or whatever, we really need to understand that probably 95% of the probiotic products out there are totally useless or of very limited use because the strains don't survive the shelf life or the processing. And then you put them into your body and they all just die off. So you have to really be careful. Companies will make a lot of claims about how wonderful their product is, but unless you know someone who has used that product or you have credible information, it might be best to stick with a product that just read reviews, ask others. The Dr. Ohhira's, we did Dr. Ohhira's professional formula for Dad years ago, and it really was useful. But those probiotics were fermented. They were a good fermentation, and they were encapsulated in a way that maintained the integrity of the organisms. Just Thrive is good. Mulberry Clinic out of Tennessee has Bountiful Biome.
I don't think you can get those ones online. I feel like I've looked.
No, you have to order them directly from Mulberry Clinic. We interviewed Theron. That interview went up a couple months ago, and it's one of his products. We've used it, but and it's fine, but I really think the Dr. Ohhira's and the Just Thrive did more. And then there's another product I forgot about, the liquid. It's also put out, I think, by the same company as Just Thrive. I'm going to have to come back to that because I can't think of the name of it. And I'm not sure if we have it on our resource list, but it's something that you prep your gut with on an empty stomach. Along the lines of Jordan Rubin's book, he talks about the necessity to have microorganisms from the soil. So like kids are really supposed to play in the dirt and they get some of it into their body and some of those compounds, not just the microbiology, but some of the actual elements get into our bodies when we're picking a fresh carrot or radish and eating it, or we're playing in the dirt. So some of those compounds are humic acid, fulvic acid, and there are some other ones. And you can actually get supplements. Maker's Diet, Jordan Rubin created one. It looks like dirt, and I can't think of the name of it, and I have not seen it for quite some time on a shelf. But my point with that is that it's not just about the microorganisms and putting them back in. It's also about creating the environment, which is what these other things do. You have to have the environment in your microbiome that the bacteria can grab a hold and stabilize. Now, I also talk a lot about getting our nutrients from food, and that includes getting our probiotics from food. Obviously, when you have severe gut dysbiosis, you're going to need some further help than just food, but we also need food. And the richest food sources of probiotics are going to be your fermented foods and your cultured, especially dairy. This is my favorite yogurt. And this brings me to the point that it's not just about a few microorganisms. Erin, you listed probably 5 different things. Most yogurts have 3, at the most 5 microorganisms that make up the culture, that break down the sugar in this case, dairy, but it doesn't have to necessarily be dairy. This is an example of, it's really the best yogurt I've ever found on a store shelf, and I buy 6 at a time because I don't ever want to be without it. This particular one has how many strains? This is pastured organic milk, and it's whole. So that was another thing I wanted to say. You need the fat because the microorganisms need the fat. So a low-fat diet or a low-fat yogurt is not what you want. You need the fat. So this happens to be whole milk. And then the cultures are, I didn't put my contacts on, so I'm going to struggle through this. L. bulgarius, S. thermophilus, L. acidophilus, L. bifo. I told Erin I can't pronounce these things right. L.
Trying to pull it up so I can read it off of their website.
Yeah, and maybe you can see it from here. It's at the top. Or I can look really silly and put on a second pair of glasses, which I sometimes do. Hey, they're both, that does look silly. Okay. Bifidobacterium, L. paracei, and L. Okay, I'm not going to pronounce the last one. But there you've got about 6 different organisms. I also make another type of yogurt that technically isn't yogurt because the organisms are not considered part of yogurt, but it's a yogurt with L. gesseri and L. reuteri. And those I'm learning to make them now with raw milk. William Davis, who wrote Wheat Belly, promotes making these 2 types of non-yogurt yogurts, and he doesn't call them yogurt, but he also says you have to use cream or half and half that is pasteurized in order to prevent the other naturally occurring organisms in raw milk from proliferating and subduing the L. gesseri or L. reuteri. However, I've always wondered about this. I never accepted that, but I'm reading just yesterday about someone recommending making the same types of progurt, is what they're commonly called, with raw milk and not using any prebiotic fiber, inulin. So that's another difference. But the point is that all of these organisms are just a handful of the multitude, the incalculable number and variety of microorganisms that belong in our gut and that are supposed to work symbiotically. So putting in or trying to put in 2 or 3 or even 5, whether you're taking a capsule or you're eating some kind of good yogurt, that still is not enough. We need a wide variety in the gut, but some of these are particularly healing. Now, one of the things about the yogurt, if you're going to use yogurt as a means of probiotics, you need to go on a gut healing diet first, and that is going to exclude dairy for a time. So you can make a yogurt with coconut milk, with pure coconut milk.
Or Or I think you could use goat milk too, because it's going to be
Yeah.
a little bit easier on your.
Yeah. Yeah. You can, however, on GAPS diet, you're not doing dairy at all. But the other point about that is that when you do start with yogurt of any kind, and I love goat milk is my preferred milk. But if you're purchasing milk or making yogurt yourself, purchasing yogurt or making yogurt, it needs to be cultured for at least 24 hours. The Progurt, the El Rutari and El Gusari, they culture for 36 hours. I used to set up on my counter a roasting pan, and I'd fill it halfway with water, and I would put my jars of milk or cream that I'd cultured. I'd put my jars in there and a thermometer, and I figured out how to put the lid on just right and how to set the roaster pan to just the right temperature so it maintained the perfect temperature for 36 hours. But I can tell you that having a giant roasting pan taking up valuable real estate on my countertop was a problem. And it would sometimes get knocked or somebody would accidentally unplug it. So I did finally buy a yogurt maker. And I think we have that yogurt maker on our resource list. If not, I'll have to give it to Erin because I did do due diligence. Before I purchased that one, I read a lot of reviews and looked at a lot of yogurt makers, and I finally settled on one. I'm really happy with it. It's completely adjustable by temperature and time. So now I can do my 36-hour culture either in individual jars or in a larger glass container. But I can do that. It takes up about this much countertop space, and I get about a quart at a time. It's perfect. So I recommend that. But the reason for 24 hours at least is because when you're trying to heal your gut, you need to not put the sugars into it. And that kind of brings us back to the FODMAP and the low FODMAP diet as well. So eliminate the sugars, and that's why we don't even do raw dairy initially, because there's lactose, which is a sugar. But you ferment this stuff, culture it for 24 hours at least, and the sugar is all eaten up. You do the other for 36 hours, and there's almost, if there's any residual sugar at all, it's very, very small. And so instead you have the benefit of the microorganisms and the fats that help to feed the microorganisms and help them take hold. Okay, that's a lot. And that's a lot. The FODMAP, I'm going to come back to my favorite healing food in just a moment. But we mentioned FODMAP, and I think that we really should talk about it for a moment. A low FODMAP diet can help people with a lot of things, a lot of sensitivities and allergies, and even learning problems, focus problems, things that are brain issues but still relate to the gut. So just as an example, a typical diet is very high in FODMAPs. And those high FODMAP and foods include some of my favorites like garlic.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to exclude garlic and onions. Avoid eating them if at all possible. And how do you even eat without garlic and onions? Remember, this is just for a time. This is not forever.
It could be a couple of weeks. It could be like 6 weeks. But yeah, no, it's not forever, just for a little while.
Legumes like beans, of course, are going to be, because they have more carbohydrates, they're going to be high in FODMAPs. Leeks, even leeks. And yet leeks can be so helpful. I'm just trying to pull up a variety here to give you an idea. Certain kinds of cabbage, like Savoy cabbage, shallots are my favorite, and that's on that list too. Mm-hmm. This particular website where I'm pulling these lists up is ibsdiets.org. So if you want to look that up to get your own list, you may. Obviously, fruits are typically going to be high on the FODMAP diet, high FODMAP foods, and pretty much almost any fruit. They contain fructose naturally, which digests slowly in your gut, but again, it's sugar. So apricots, bananas, cherries, currants, figs, on and on. I'm not even going to go through that list. And then your meats are typically okay for the most part, as long as they're not made into things like sausages that have added sugars or garlic and onion and such. All of your cereals and grains are going to be high FODMAP foods. Okay, and then on the GAPS diet, you are eliminating all grains anyway. I'm sorry, I can't pull that up. It's doing weird things. I have these lists, but it suddenly put up a spinny game thing, and that's definitely not what I'm wanting. So we're going to move beyond FODMAP. It is pretty easy to find a list of high and low FODMAP foods online, or you can pick up a book. But I want to provide some real help, starting with the Gut and Physiology Syndrome book. It can seem overwhelming to even think about, well, what do I eat then? Or what do I feed my children? And how do I feed my family? Now, Aaron, it's just Aaron and Kevin, and you were able to eat and survive with it just being the two of you. When I've done it for a whole family and a husband, it's been different. So what I typically do, just as a tip about survival, is I don't typically make two separate meals. Dad doesn't get one thing and we get something different. What I do is I make a core meal, and then the things that I would add that would be harmful if you're on a gut healing journey, I add to part of it, so that those who need to avoid the sugars and the disaccharides, monosaccharides, fibers, and all of that, you're still eating the same food. It's just slightly different. So I'm making one pan of food, taking part of it out before I add everything else. So just a tip, okay? Otherwise, some of these foods that I would make anyway that would be good for George or for some of your siblings, Aaron, when I was helping them and doing it with them, we were fine to all eat some of the foods. Maybe not every day. We might want something extra now and then. But I'm going to recommend our friend Mandy's book, Real Food Recovery, because this is full of recipes, tips, and ideas for how to heal your gut and how to get well, including how to make yogurt and the benefits of water and on. Lots of good recipes. You can learn to adapt your own recipes as well. But this is a really good basic starting point, Real Food Recovery, because it's practical. Mandy is the mother of several children, both natural and adopted and fostered. And she's followed this program with quite a few of her foster children and helped them to recover. We interviewed her. You can look at that interview. I think it was about a year ago or a year and a half ago. I don't remember, but
November of 2023.
November of 2023. So that's an excellent interview. She's a wonderful person, but she does talk about this. So you can make really simple meals and just eliminate the grains, the starches, the legumes, and all of that, and instead make foods that are high in protein and fats and low starch vegetables that should always be cooked, by the way, or fermented. And a note about that Aaron, you can really address is that a lot of people who have gut dysbiosis issues are also sensitive to histamines. And so when you're sensitive to histamines, things like sauerkraut are not going to be your friend.
Mm.
And you've had to really figure out how to deal with that. What are some of the strategies that you have used?
Well, the histamine is also very much tied to stress. So for me, understanding that has also that when my histamine issues flare up, because for me, I was like, I know I have a gluten allergy. Like that's for sure. I definitely have that. And I know I'm sensitive to some things like corn. Um, but it felt like sometimes my flare ups would be one time it would be, food X, and the next time it would be food Y. And the next time it would be, I would have food X and then it would be fine. It wouldn't bother me. So I kept having these like strange symptoms where sometimes things would bother me and sometimes they wouldn't. And I didn't really understand. And I started learning more about histamine and mast cell activation syndrome. And it is it's connected to food. It's connected to your immune system and inflammation, but it's also really connected to stress. And with dealing with work stress or, any kind of like emotional stress, if my histamine bucket was, I always thought of it as like my histamine tolerance I had a bucket of tolerance. And if my histamines were intolerance was if the bucket was lower, it wasn't a big deal. I could have things. But if my bucket's in that it's getting full, it's about to overflow, and a stress event triggers it, then that's when I would just flare up really bad. So the
And
histamine issue is kind of complicated because it's very, very stress related.
okay, yeah. I've noticed, or I've been with you a couple of times when this has happened, and I think it's important to understand that I've seen you have meltdowns, emotional meltdowns. Our kids, not my family kids, but kids in general, are having real severe mental breakdowns. And it's oftentimes, more often than not, certainly there's a lot going on culturally in this world that causes emotional instability. But I've watched kids in a school setting just go from being okay to being screaming, crying, punching, hitting, get me out of here. And I know it's related to some of the foods that they're eating, and whether it is because they have a histamine intolerance or they have something else going on in their gut. I think it behooves us to think about these things and try some things out, play around, try to figure it out, but not just put them on a medication or put ourselves on a medication. But also I've seen the skin rashes pop out when you've eaten something that you shouldn't have. And I've seen it in other people as well. I'm not just picking on Erin, but I bring this up just to show how quickly we can have a negative effect when we're consuming something that is harmful to our gut, because our gut is not healthy to begin with. Let's see. Tara, I think, is asking about a 9-hour yogurt option. You really need to do 24, because even with an 8 or a 9-hour yogurt, you have a lot of residual lactose, so a lot of residual sugar. So it still is too much. And Carmen, don't eat anything that you can't pronounce doesn't necessarily apply. There are actually a lot of things that normally would be good for us and are natural, and they're hard to pronounce, but it doesn't always mean that they're good for us. But also often it means that they are good for us. And I'm assuming you're referring to me trying to fumble through all of those beneficial organisms in the yogurt. There definitely are a lot of things that are naturally occurring that are good for us. And yeah, we need them. And sometimes we don't. Okay. And so,
And regarding the question about my flare-ups, what they look like, a lot of it was would come out in my skin. I'd just get hives, really bad eczema, rashes. It would just, that's mostly where it would flare up. But I would have like meltdowns too sometimes, just like be on the couch crying and I didn't know why.
Yeah.
Kevin would come home and be like, "What's wrong?" And I'd be like, "I don't know."
At least you knew that it was an unreasonable meltdown and that you'd get over it. But yeah, I've seen that happen with you, and I've seen it happen with other people. So it's worth noting and worth thinking about. We will do some interviews with some people to go deeper into, in particular, I want to talk about mast cell activation syndrome and the GAPS diet. But we're running out of time, and I want to talk about more of, in particular, the most healing food that there is, I think, on the planet. This is one of the most healing foods, but people, make your stock and make it yourself. Don't buy it. Make your stock. I am constantly making stock. This is chicken stock. I just bottled it last night. I made a half gallon. We had chicken. I'm tired of chicken, by the way, but we had chicken, and I took all of the leftover pieces and I made a good batch of stock. On the bottom, there's some sediment. I won't use that, but it's sealed with fat at the top. We talked about that a week or two ago when we were talking about food preservation. I never toss the fat. The fat are microbes. Our microbiome needs the fat. Lots of nutrients in that fat, including fully formed vitamin A. But this stock, when you make it yourself and you do a long, slow simmer, you don't boil your bones, you simmer your bones and your carcasses and your connective tissue and skin. You simmer it. I use a little bit of apple cider vinegar in the pot because that helps, the acidity helps to break down the compounds, especially in the connective tissue. This stuff, you can live off of it. You might not maintain a really good body weight.
Yeah, it's actually not a complete protein. Bone broth is not a complete protein. So it doesn't have all of the non-essential amino acids. So
and we'll talk about amino acids at a later date, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about essential amino acids. And if you mix rice and beans, you can get a complete no. We'll talk about that later, but the broth is super soothing to the gut, and it is very healing. Mm-hmm. And you can live off of it for a time. But I typically was using turmeric, ginger, garlic. I guess for a low FODMAP diet, I would have not used garlic, but that with cilantro and ghee, and I would add the broth, the healing breakfast soup recipe that's on our YouTube channel as well. That's what I'm talking about. But you can add eggs. You can cook eggs in it. That's what I'm trying to get to. And then you have a complete protein. So I would warm up the broth and toss the eggs in and just stir it up. Then you have complete protein. Or on the GAPS diet, you're starting out with meat stock. The word stock and broth, they're two different words. They're used interchangeably. And even in the culinary world, there's interplay there. But just for the sake of clarity, meat stock is what I'll call a stock that you make using meaty bones, or maybe a whole chicken, or maybe a bone-in roast with some marrow bones thrown in. And then what you get is you do get more of the complete protein, because you've got the flesh meat and hopefully organ meats in there as well.
And
so
the connective tissue.
Yep. I always utilize connective tissue anyway. I keep frozen chicken feet in the freezer. And when I remember, I toss 1 or 2 of those in as well. So you get a lot of good connective tissue breaking down into that broth. So the more you put in, the more nutritious and health promoting it is. But this is absolutely one of the best things that you can do to heal that, and giving up the sugar. And the other thing, I'm going to put a plug in again for fermented cod liver oil. This is very health promoting and healing as well. I can't overemphasize enough. You can't overemphasize how important this is. Fermented cod liver oil. Now, I sometimes buy fermented cod liver oil, butter oil blend, and probably for most people that's a good idea, because the butter oil from which is produced from milk, from butter, from rapidly growing, when cows are eating rapidly growing green grass, which is primarily spring but also fall, that contains compounds that are not present in the summer and in the winter. And so when you take that butter oil or the ghee from that period of time and you combine it with the cod liver oil, the two work synergistically. The only reason why I typically am only doing cod liver oil is because I also eat ghee, and I mix ghee with coconut oil, and I take a spoonful of that occasionally. I used to do it every day. So I'm getting a lot of that butter oil anyway in my diet because I use a lot of ghee. But Simply Ghee, I didn't bring up the jar, but a shout out to the Simply Ghee gals because they produce an excellent ghee product. Pure Indian Foods is another one that's very good. But so the combination of ghee and the cod liver oil, Dr. Weston A. Price found to be like supercharged. If you just use cod liver oil fermented, please, and that's a whole nother topic. Actually, I need to ask Dave again when he can come on to talk about it. CLO, there, making myself a note. This by itself is really potent, but I don't recommend most cod liver oil brands. This is the one brand that I recommend above and beyond any other, but occasionally someone needs like a low histamine one. This is from fermented cod livers. It's not a high histamine supplemental food, but sometimes people find they need something like a Rosita or Premier. But most of the cod liver oils out there, I do not recommend. They're highly processed. The vitamins are broken down, denatured, and all of that. And it's an incomplete food. So Green Pasture Products, we have a link for it with a 10% discount, I believe, on your orders. I can't stress that enough. This is part of a gut healing diet. This is part of a gut healing diet. This is part of a gut healing diet. And I'll just add before we get off also that kefir, dairy kefir, is not part of an early gut healing diet because it's just too potent. It has so many microorganisms in it that it can overwhelm an already weakened system. So you don't start with that, but you certainly can move on to making dairy kefir. Very, very easy to make, and with raw milk as we recommend. Okay. What else what other questions do we have? Can you make it in the Instant Pot? I do not recommend making it in the Instant Pot. And I have an Instant Pot chicken broth video on our YouTube channel. I only put it up there because for a lot of people, that's the only way they're going to make it. So here are the two problems with Instant Pot. If you do it on a slow cooker mode instead of pressure, you're probably fine. But pressure denatures the proteins. So I don't pressure cook or pressure can. But the other problem with an Instant Pot is that it has a lot of nickel in it. For instance, it doesn't work on my induction burner. I've taken the insert out just to test it, or you can test it with a magnet. If there is too much nickel or other metal in there other than iron or steel, then that can leach into your food. So the way you know is whether or not a magnet will stick to it, or in this case, as I mentioned, does it work on my induction burner? No, it does not. Okay, it's got a lot of metal or nickel in it, or maybe cadmium or something else. When you pressure cook that, you're putting that right into your food. So please don't do that. But if an Instant Pot is what you have, just do the slow cooker mode and do 12 hours. If you're doing red meat bones, roast them first and do 24 hours. But don't do the pressure setting, okay? I really regret even having made that video, but I'll do another one just with the stovetop, which is how I always make my stock and my broth. Okay, and I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody else. That was Connie's question. Erin, am I missing anything?
I think that was all the questions.
Okay. You guys, thank you, because we have had a lot of good questions from several people, and that's what we want. So I think the main takeaway is that all of these issues that we have because of all of the inputs that cause a damaged gut, they're not irreversible. They don't have to be permanent, and they certainly do not have to get worse. They can get better. I've watched Erin. I watched you struggle for several years while you figured out with help what was really going on in your body. And I'm so glad you finally did figure it out. I've watched other people do the same. And in our household, we've gone through several rounds of having to go through the GAPS diet. And I'm going to, I was thinking about this earlier today. My husband, in order to live, he really needs to make some changes. And I'm going to suggest that we just together go back on a really strict low FODMAP and GAPS diet and do all the right things that we did years ago so he can recover, because he's just not doing well. But all of this is reversible. God made our bodies in such a wonderful way that our bodies want to be healthy. They try so hard to be healthy, but it's up to us to make sure that we're not putting in antagonists, but instead that we're putting into our bodies the things that help our bodies to heal and to grow and to maintain and to be strong. And at the same time, everyone, our emotions and our spiritual life are just like, our spiritual life is more important than anything else anyway. But when it comes to healing, it's like a trilogy. Mind, body, soul connection. We've got to work on our emotions, and we will talk about emotion code and feelings buried alive never die. We're going to talk about that soon. But also work on our relationships to have healthy relationships, reduce our stress. It all works together. Stress causes so many problems, as Erin has already talked about. So I think that we're going to call it a day, but it has been delightful. We covered a lot of territory, but we will go even deeper later.
Hold on one sec. Tara has one more question.
Okay. Instead of ghee, can cow's tallow be used? Okay, first, that's two questions. So first, tallow is really beneficial, but it doesn't have the same nutrients that ghee does. And in particular, it doesn't have the butyric acid and the high vitamin A content. So no, it's not a replacement, but it is an excellent fat to be using otherwise. But it doesn't replace ghee. And then should raw milk kefir be let on the counter for 24 plus hours? Definitely at least 24 hours. All of those microorganisms in kefir grains, there are at least 23 to 26. I've even heard as many as 29. But there is a much larger variety of microorganisms in the kefir, and they're good, they're beneficial. But when your gut is damaged and you're experiencing issues, you need to start out slow. So even with this good yogurt, as I said, you don't start with it right away. You're avoiding it initially. And then when you start to add yogurt in, whether you're making your own 24-hour yogurt, or I just am really thankful that this is on the market, because no, it's not raw, but this is an excellent product. But we're starting with like a teaspoon. I think I have a teaspoon here somewhere. Oh, yes, right in front of me. You're starting with a teaspoon once a day, and then slowly building up. Once you see that your body tolerates it and benefits from it, then you increase more, and eventually you work up to kefir. And that's wonderful. But fresh raw milk is very high in carbohydrates. So you want to avoid that. If you can make your own, especially with something like goat's milk or sheep's milk, that's even better. All right. I think that is then it for our questions, and we're out of time, and my clock says it's time to go pick up our youngest from her nanny job. So we'll be back next week with another good episode, and we'll reschedule probably. Well, Aaron keeps the schedule. I don't keep the schedule. But we have some neat things coming up. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week. And please, I never remember to say this, and I don't even like to say it, but like, subscribe, and share. Please share. We want this information to be shared, and it helps. It helps us. So, and you can buy us a glass of raw milk. There's a little icon there somewhere, and that helps us to pay the bills. So thank you. Okay. I hope to see you all next week. And until then, have a great, great week. Take care of yourselves. And remember, God loves you. And so do we. Cliche, I don't know, but there we go. Bye-bye.
Bye.